Добрый день, коллеги, дамы и господа. Я рада приветствовать.
Afternoon, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome our guests today, our colleagues who are with us today, and all interested participants and audience who are with us here in the Media Center, Press Center, Media Center Rossiya сегодня. And those who are with us online see the broadcast there. Today's roundtable discussion is dedicated to the day of to the African Liberation Day, and it's my pleasure to congratulate all those who live in Africa with this day and that are celebrated for the 59th time and symbolizes unity of people living in Africa. And with our guests today, we will focus on the ways of solving the challenges of, in particular, one region of Africa, very disturbed one, not only for Africa, but for the whole world, Sahel. It's a huge tropical savanna region between Sahara in the north and and Betelands in the south, and about 11 countries belong to that: Senegal, Mauritius, Niger, Cameroon, Nigeria, Eritrea, and others. And the total population of this region is over 300 million people. And with us today to discuss Sahel issues, we will lean on the international report prepared by the Russian Council for International Affairs, prepared together with the International Committee of Red Cross. The title of this paper is Subpoints of African Continent Sahel, Review of the Situation and Prospects. The paper was published both in Russian and in English. It is a review of causes of economic and political crisis in Sahel, main actors of the conflict, and possible ways out of the crisis. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest today in the press center Rossiya сегодня. We have Director General of Council for International Affairs of Russia, Andrei Kurtunov, head of the humanitarian policy issues for the Red Cross International Committee, Laurence Dalier. Thank you for being with us. And also together here with us, we have head of the theory and history of international relations of People's Friendship University of Russia, Denis Degtyaryov. Today, we're on video line. We have three experts, and it's my pleasure to introduce them. Coordinator of operations in Sahel countries of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Céline Degen. Hello. Welcome you. Member of the Royal Geographical Committee Society, research of the Esri Center for Iran and Gulf States Studies, and Haifa University, Glenn Segel, Israel. Hello. And we also have a head of the political studies and management of the University of the Free State, Solomon Hussein from South Africa. I welcome you. And after introducing everyone, we get to the discussion of the report, since the Russian Federation was the initiator of this paper, and why this topic is so relevant today. Thank you very much, Oksana, and I will allow myself with some digression from this topic. Virtually 13 minutes ago, I got a phone call from RBK, a newspaper and news outlet, and invited me to discuss the situation on Russian-Ukrainian conflict. And I said that unfortunately, I cannot join them because I'll to join the discussion on the Sahel. I say, you're so lucky to discuss something else besides that political conflict. And it's true that the main attention is focused on Donbass and on things that are changing or not changing on the battlefield, and what are the chances to stop fire and find possible ways of out and find some political settlement for that region. For us and for our partners, Ukraine is the main focus of our attention and of our emotion, many and varied, but bitter as well. And nevertheless, today we celebrate the day of liberation of Africa, and we shouldn't forget that the role of the African continent in global politics and global economy is on the rise steadily, and Africa is a source of new opportunities, not only of new challenges. It's the youngest continent, and it's the main demographical resource of the humanity, and for by the end of this century, every 4 persons after 10 will live in Africa. And this continent has enormous possibilities from the point of development, mineral resources, energy, and also transportation and logistical chains. We must remember that against the backdrop of dramatic situation in other regions, the African continent remains a very important place of forming the future future world order and relations, global relations. And even the conflict in Ukraine has consequences, immediate consequences for Africa, in particular to the region that is being discussed today, for Sahel. Let's take Ukrainian refugees in Europe. There are several million of them, citizens of Ukraine, who are in Central and Western Europe currently, and in African states. And African states raise the question whether the hospitality that is offered to Ukrainian refugees will embrace refugees and displaced persons from Africa in Europe. There are different points of view on this, and these points diverge. And they are quite emotional sometimes, and so situation in Africa is tightly linked with what is happening in Europe. And situation in Ukraine is also mentioned in relation with the food crisis that may be pending. And many African countries depend on grain supplies and shipments from Ukraine and Russia. But since all food prices are interrelated globally, so raise on grain prices go up, and immediately this boosts prices on rice, maize, and other grains. So the overall food index went up by 1/3 recently, and this is very relevant for African countries that are not self-sufficient from the point of food security. So we're speaking about consequences of the current crisis for global energy. March saw peak of prices on hydrocarbons with $130 per barrel and more. And again, for African countries, and in particular countries in Sahel, this crisis creates opportunities for some and additional problems for others. And agriculture is one of the energy consuming industries, and so there is a tight link between energy security and food security issues. So speaking about Sahel, main attention is drawn to political instability in a number of Sahel states. Definitely there is a threat that Sahel may become one of the centers of international terrorism and radical movements. So the question is how their current political crisis may have a negative impact on the situation in Sahel. Many accuse Russia of being a spoiler, the country that will pursue the line for destabilization of the situation in Sahel, that will pursue the line of reducing a Western influence on this region to the maximum, will supply weapons and use military operations to its benefit, to keep tension in the region and to use it for its as a bargaining chip for in its own policy with the West. In our report, we try to outline the realm of problems that Sahel will be challenged with in the near future, and also we try to outline some possible ways of cooperation. We understand that cooperation is becoming more challenging now than it was 3 months ago, and Ukrainian crisis overshadows all regions, and in particular the region in Africa. But I will allow myself to say that our paper has not become obsolete. Many ideas that are there are still topical and still relevant, and to the extent we can, we need to separate problems in Africa from those that we are challenged with in other regions. It is difficult, but I think that it's one of the tasks that we may set for ourselves and to set as an objective for us. So the practical suggestions that are included in the paper deserve attention. I will not retell them, but I'm sure that we will cover some of them today. So Africa is not a challenge, is not only a problem, and is not something that divides us, but something that offers opportunities to us and may bring us together. I will also would like also to express my acknowledgement on behalf of the Russian Council for International Affairs to our partners from the International Committee of the Red Cross. I'm very grateful for this cooperation, and I hope that it will continue in some forms. And naturally, I want to congratulate everyone with the Day of Africa, and it's an important day that is important not only for the African continent, but for all those who are related, who are concerned with Africa and who are in this topic in Russia. Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrei Vadimovich. And now I'd like to invite Mr. Redalier to join our conversation. As Andrei Kortunov rightly said, that international community should not leave Sahel and Africa at large without attention. Will you brief us on preparation of humanitarian actions in Sahel after 1 year after?
Unfortunately, I cannot speak Russian, so I will speak English. And I wish to share some also welcoming words on behalf of the International Committee of the Red Cross. Unfortunately, our head of delegation, Ikhtiar Aslanov, could not be present today, so it asked me to be representing the institution. In this important anniversary for Africa, I would like also to thank Rossiya segodnya for hosting this event that we also consider deserves the attention in this infosphere totally absorbed by the situation in Ukraine. And also I want to thank our dear friend Andrei Kortunov and the Russian International Affairs Council for co-organizing and co-chairing these events. I wish finally to thank all the panelists who are here or online. who accepted to take their time for a new discussion on the challenges and the prospects of the Sahel, and to dive in once again on this extremely vulnerable sub-Saharan region. Indeed, they will help us unpacking the challenges and the needs for sustainable responses in a region where insecurity and violence have increased. The consequences of climate change are further impacting communities already affected by conflict, and the food crisis is adding sufferings of a population who, more than ever before, looks at its displacement as its main solution. So, more specifically, the deteriorating situation of food security and malnutrition is a concerning matter, requiring special attention, increased vigilance, and a mix of short-term and long-term responses. Climate change is accelerating 1.5 times faster than elsewhere in the world when we talk to the Sahel. It has a direct impact on droughts, and the capacity of local communities to adapt to a changing climate is drastically limited by conflict that weakens institutions, essential services, and the economy. So climate action needs to be reinforced in those communities, we believe, by strengthening local capacities to adapt to climate shocks. The security situation has deteriorated, if we take situation over the last year, with a growing number of attacks against civilians. And experts say that the worst has yet to come. This violence causes continuous displacement at an unprecedented scale. To halt or slow down this upward trend, we consider respecting international humanitarian law and the IHL as a first step. IHL should be respected in counter-terrorist operations too. IHL says nothing precludes its application to such operations. And the ICRC is trying to reaching out and engage with all belligerents on questions related to their IHL obligation, but also on humanitarian access, which is more than allowing humanitarians to work. It is about ensuring that conflict-affected people and communities can reach what they need impartially, in safety and dignity. So I look forward to a fruitful discussion today. Thank you very much.
Благодарю вас.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ridalier. Denis Andreevich, Dictator, the floor is yours. From your point of view, what are the main challenges what are the main reasons of the crisis in Sahel? Good afternoon. First, to begin with, I want to congratulate everyone on the Day of Liberation of Africa and all those who are related with this day, and there are many, the number of these people is on the growth. Well, having analyzed the situation and looking at, we need to look at several levels. Micro level, that is climatic change, farmers and shepherds, that's one level. Next level is definitely related to ethnic diversity of this region, and thus this sort of challenges remain, for instance, in Mali. And on the other hand, the Mali side believes that back in 1957, France launched a project, Sahara region project, that is the territory where the Tuareg live. And the law setting up this organization was not cancelled. And so they think that reformatting of borders in Sahel and formation of new states, that's a thing that is there on the air. And there are three sources of conflicts there. Triangle, Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso, and Islamist movements, Islamabad, and so Fulani, that's another aspect of that. borders between the Nigeria, Niger, and Chad, and the Boko Haram issue, and Libya. The situation in Libya had its negative effect. Gaddafi had his own relations set in the region, and when Blaise Compaoré left the office in Burkina Faso, he also had his own set of agreements with militants in the region, and with the change of presidents, all those agreements and disappeared. In 2021, we saw the major number of victims, over 1,000 in Burkina Faso, over 500 or 600 people, those who are who died. And in 2021, the situation peaked in Nigeria. There was 1.5 thousand people that were killed in Nigeria, and then situation changed, and president from the north came, and the trust to the president from the north is higher among the population. But these three sources of conflict are interconnected, of the regional and international terrorism, and I may be wrong, but the problem is aggravated by other factors as well, and it may become similar to what we have in Syria and Iraq. It's a very challenging issue, and it's like a stress test for all actors. For instance, for Mali, that's a stress test for its fight for independence. I remember visiting the country in the end of February and talking with the Prime Minister. We had discussions there, and he said, looking at the situation, I read memoirs and information on Patrice Lumumba and Thomas Sankara. I want to understand where they had made a mistake. I want to achieve independence for my country, but where the predecessors made a mistake, and it's a big challenge and stress test for France. There are certain things that should be defined. The left intellectuals speak about sub-imperial power. There is a collective West, the United States, and sub-imperial power with its zone of influence. So the situation in Sahel is a big stress test for this task with Serval Barhan. Barhan is not already perceived by the local population. Well, let it be not a Barhan operation, but some other. But as soon as in Tuareg language, that's meant sword. So that's for them, that means reformatting over the region, MINUSMA. MINUSMA, another operation, and African states and European states, but the top, it is the French that are at the top, so they use multilateralism or initiative G5 Sahel, G5, and Mali withdrew from it 5 days ago. Why? Because since 2020, the operational management of G5 is combined with a Barhan operation. Virtually, it means that and the French govern things. So it's also stressed for ECOWAS, for Nigeria in particular, as the regional leader. ACTSHOT process was launched. It was launched back in 2013. with more representatives involved. For instance, there is no Algeria in G5, but no problem in the Sahel can be resolved without Algeria. It's a good country, French-speaking, but a little bit in opposition. Without Nigeria, things cannot be resolved as well. And France was not interested in bringing Nigeria there. And it's a stress test for Russia and for our academic milieu as well, because experts of various types are necessary there. We had Vasily Filipov and two teams from People's Friendship University of Russia, from Amara Sideba from Mali. We dug into the actors of conflict, and another team under the guidance of Svetlana Bakeria worked with the International Committee of the Red Cross. It's a very challenging task, and teamwork is necessary. So those who, the papers that had been before ours show this, and our paper is not the last. The role of one person is not enough. A teamwork is required here. So we are only at the very beginning of this long path, challenging path, and I believe that such papers are still in need. Thank you very much, Denis Andreevich. And now I would like to pass the microphone to Ms. Salant again. How the International Red Cross overcomes the challenges in humanitarian issues in Sahel. Will you elaborate on the challenges that are associated with the food security and internal migration? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here today. And first of all, congratulations on this report that I've read with a lot of attention. As the colleague said, even a year after the first joint webinar between our two institutions, the paper is not obsolete, and it's still very much relevant. But I would like to take the opportunity here today to flag, as you mentioned, the trends that the ICRC is focusing on regarding the humanitarian situation. I will start exactly with the food crisis. Since the end of 2021, the ICRC is getting ready to assist the population facing a dire food crisis in Africa, and in particular in the Sahel and the Horn of Africa. The current crisis is unfortunately expected to outspace the previous year, to be worse than the other years. The lean season that has started already in West Africa and the Sahel is set to be catastrophic, with a dramatic increase of people in need of urgent food and nutrition assistance in this 2022. In 2021, there was 21 million people in need of urgent food and nutrition assistance. So far in 2022, we are already reaching the number of 33.4 million people in need. That's a 22% increase in population in need. This crisis has multiple factors. The two mains that we analyze at the ICRC and try to address is the deterioration of the security environment. The security environment being more difficult, the population is prevented, thousands of households are prevented to reach their field, to move freely around the countries with their livestock, to have access to food for them, but also for their animals. The other one is linked to climate change that many of the colleagues have already mentioned during introductory sentence, which is the disastrous rainfall of 2021 that did not allow for harvest or to keep the livestock alive and in good shape. I was in Mali myself a couple of weeks ago, and every person I would meet would tell me that the problem is the rain. They know that ICRC cannot make it rain, but they're really focused on this problematic issue and the fact that it's not being addressed. This being said, the ICRC teams in the Sahel are at work and focus on an emergency response by providing food, vouchers, or cash to those vulnerable households affected, together, of course, with our usual partner, the National Red Cross societies in these countries. But the ICRC also aims at protecting existing livelihoods, such as in Mali, where the ICRC works, for example, through an agreement with the Ministry of Livestock to address animal health, especially in the areas where the government doesn't have control and is not present. For example, this program will allow thousands of livestock to be vaccinated and will allow better health for the livestock and keep part of the livelihood of this household. However, ICRC is conscious that food insecurity, it will continue being on top of Africa's problem. So ICRC is continuing its efforts to build more sustainable solution alongside with development actors. ICRC has called for this partnership in several meetings, and I can only name the one in Malabo that is taking place with the African Union these days, where our director, Patrick Youssef, is sending these same messages of partnership, not only to address the emergency response, but also midterm and long-term response. The other dynamic that you've mentioned is also the deteriorating security environment. It's one of the challenges of working in Sahel's countries when we are, like the ICRC, a humanitarian actor. You have to juggle between emergency, conflict-related needs of the population, but also mid and long-term, more structural investment. So setting up priorities between those two dynamics in a deteriorating security environment is definitely a difficult exercise. The military operation intensify across the board, especially in the three border area that you have already mentioned, also between Niger, Burkina, and Mali. And civilian populations, unfortunately, continue to suffer from indiscriminate attack, lack of distinction by the belligerents, difficult, when not impossible, access to healthcare services, and weapon contamination, to name only the most dominant trends that we observe. Thanks to its network and multi-level initiatives, the ICRC does enjoy relatively good access to weapon bearers from all the parties, so from the government side and also from the non-state armed groups, and we continue our effort in promoting the international humanitarian law. Because this security situation is unfortunately deteriorating, it's not always evident for the ICRC to argue in favor of international humanitarian law respect when counterterrorism legislation sometimes pose legal challenges, including for humanitarian access. The Sahel, again, the colleagues have mentioned, is currently undergoing an important transition in terms of security actors' presence in the area, and ICRC wants to remind that unconditional respect of international humanitarian law must remain the common denominator. Moreover, the aspect of neutral, independent, impartial humanitarian actors such as the ICRC is really paramount. We need this to operate, and it has to be also considered in counterterrorism legislation. This contributes to the ICRC being accepted in areas both under the control of the government and those under the control of non-state armed groups, and therefore is that it allows us to reach communities everywhere. For example, in Mali, since mid-2020, the ICRC delegation put in place what we call a mobile war surgery program. This is based on certain criteria. After a fighting, a team of surgeon, anesthetist, nurse will be deployed to a remote health center, usually where the state is absent, to operate on war wounded. So far, it's more than 100 weapon wounded that have benefited from this activity. Otherwise, without the presence of the ICRC and the ability to reach those areas, they would not probably have survived from their wounds. And this is only possible because the ICRC is considered neutral, independent, impartial by all the parties, and because we put human beings at the center of our activity. So this is one of the many examples I wanted to share with you, where the ICRC in Sahel works hard to reach the most vulnerable in all areas. Finally, the last dynamic that I wanted to highlight that already was also mentioned is the internal displacement. The number of internal displaced has drastically increased in the Sahel, be it to escape the increasingly unsecure environments, but also to find water, to sow and harvest, or for the livestock. Internal displaced numbers in the Sahel have increased. Burkina Faso, where I was also a couple of weeks ago, is experiencing the fastest growth in displaced persons due to the overall crisis. The approximate 260% increase over the past 12 months, which means that today in Burkina Faso, we have 1.8 million internally displaced people. Those people either find refuge with relatives, around their area or in anonymous urban center. But the bottom line is that they put pressure on host communities, on infrastructures in environments that are already weakened by the food security, the poor health system, outdated water network. For example, in the city of Gao in the northern Mali, the city has grown so much because of the population of internal displaced and the several waves of displacement that the water network is not answering to the needs of these people, be it the host community or the displaced people. Because it's a huge size of intervention, and thanks to the good access the ICRC benefits, we are trying to establish a partnership with the Malian Regional Water Office, as well as development actors, to address the matter and to do a big project of renovation of the network, the water network in Gao. Another example would be also in Burkina Faso, related to displacement. Only for the month of April 2022, ICRC provided cash to 5,000 households in the region of Wahiguya and Senegena, which are two cities on the north of Burkina. And in the same city of Wahiguya, the number of displaced families is putting so much pressure on the health system that ICRC is building an extension of the maternity ward of the health center to better receive also the increasing number of patients. I had a chance to visit that center 2 weeks ago, and I could also see the multidisciplinary approach that the ICRC tries to prioritize. For example, there is also a water pump that was built inside this health center that will be also extended to the neighborhood of the center, so that the other population can also benefit from it, because the pressure is such in all these cities that the system cannot answer all the needs. This would be the three main challenges and dynamics that I wanted to highlight for the ICRC in the Sahel. But I would like just to give another point before giving you back the floor, because I think the Sahel picture would not be finalized if it didn't include a short detour to the coastal areas further south. Since over a year now, and increasingly every month, countries like Ivory Coast, Benin, Togo are facing more and more similar dynamics in their northern provinces, suffering from attacks on their security forces and population being displaced. So I think it's important also as actors interested to keep the Sahel high on the diplomatic and humanitarian agenda, to keep learning also from the past, and we should not oversee the potential spillover that could very well become the title of the next joint report a year from now. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll give you back the floor. Thank you.
Благодарю вас.
Thank you very much, Ms. Degan. And now I will invite Mr. Sahel to join us. Like Denis Degtyaryov, you analyzed in the paper the main actors of the conflict in Sahel, using Mali as an example, and what are your conclusions?
Much, and good morning, good afternoon to those online, Dobry Ultra to those who speak Russian. I understand the programs in English, so I'll speak in English. First of all, congratulations on the publication report and indeed this event today that draws attention to Africa. Not everybody does this. This is despite the fact that over a quarter of the world's countries are in Africa, and what happens landwards in Africa has a maritime impact. For example, in the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, Mediterranean Basin, Suez Canal, Gibraltar Straits. So domestic African security is also European and global security, and indeed this has an impact on global trading routes. And when I talk about security, I also mean human security. The mantra in Africa, and indeed worldwide, is that local problems need local solutions. Foreign assistance is always welcome, but the history of Africa shows that foreign intervention is catastrophic. For example, colonization. So today is significant as Africa Liberation Day, but independence doesn't mean that people have become emancipated. There have been various local attempts at local solutions by local frameworks with foreign assistance. And the one I focused on in the report that we compiled over a year ago and had a webinar on was the G5 Sahel, or G5S. It is an institutional framework for coordination of regional coordination in development policies and security matters in West Africa. It was formed on 16 February 2014 in Nouakchott, Mauritania, at a summit of 5 of the Sahel independent countries, Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, and Niger. As I already mentioned slightly earlier in this event today by one of my colleagues, missing is Nigeria, the main or significant player in West Africa, or the largest country, and indeed north of that, Algeria. There are other regional groups, for example, ECOWAS, but this has also had some mixed failures and successes. Going back to the G5 Sahel, because it's very significant and very topical right now this month. It was adopted by convention on 19 December 2014. And we can see there the framework of a whole year that took to get to that point. That it's a very slow process to make change and implement successes. It's permanently seated in Mauritania. And the coordination amongst the 5 countries is organized at different levels. The military is expected at the highest level, the chief of staff. The purpose of the G5 is to strengthen the bonds in economic development as well as security, because you're not going to have security unless you have economic development, and I mean sustainable development. It is a prerequisite. And the threat of jihadist or Islamic groups operating in the region threatens both the economic as well as security. For example, Al-Qaeda, Mujawai, Al-Muharabadin, Boko Haram, they are more than one, actually, and they are uncoordinated. So it's a very, very hard issue contacting them. A bit of the history, because in 2014, France launched its own counter-terrorist mission, Operation Barkhane. And France had a very intensive historical interest in the region. For example, in Niger, it has uranium mines, and a large percentage of the French nuclear civilian energy supply is provided by uranium from Niger. So natural resources is one of the issues as well. France deployed 3,000 soldiers. On 20th of December, the G5 Sahel, with the backing of the Africa Union, which is also a major player, but not always successful, called on the United Nations Security Council. This drew in the entire world into this issue of Sahel, to set up an international force to neutralize the armed groups and help national reconciliation, establish democratic institutions. And this actually brings us also into the Libya situation, because just north of Sahel is Libya. And a solution in Sahel is linked to a solution in Libya, and vice versa. So we're finding it's not just the Sahel. We're looking southwards into Nigeria and northwards into Libya. It's a very complex situation. The military aspects of the G5 was only created 3 years later. The joint force in 2017. So once again, a very slow, protracted process. And during all this time, people obviously suffered economically, sustainable development, food crisis, famine, drought, poverty, and the terrorist organizations. In June 2017, France requested from the United Nations Security Council
Господин Сегал.
Mr. Sahel, we lost you. Looks like some technical issues. Our speaker was got disconnected. Well, we'll have him connected as soon as possible, as soon as he with us online. And now, not to waste time, I'll pass the microphone to Mr. Hussein. I see the material of your in the reports where you analyze the reasons of the conflict in Sahel. So I wonder what is to be done to overcome the conflicts, and where are we to look for ways out?
Thank you very much for having me. I think the first point that we need to emphasize is that the terrorist threat, as your previous speakers alluded to, is actually escalating both in scope and intensity. And so you see the geographic spread of terrorism in the fact that this month fears of terrorism spilling over its borders prompted the Ghanaian government to launch an anti-terrorist campaign. Togo, meanwhile, long immune from terrorism, saw militants on the 10th and 11th of May attacking a Togolese military outpost, killing 8 Togolese soldiers. The humanitarian costs have been horrendous. Beyond those killed and maimed, millions across the region are displaced, while 18 million are on the brink of starvation. Now, the expansion and increasing intensity of the terrorist threat, I think, speaks to the failure of counterterrorism, both local, regional, in the form of the Sahel G5 countries that you just heard, as well as
обеспечение
various
безопасности
international.
детей в интернет-пространстве. Как, по-вашему, какие инструменты лучше всего применимы? Какие советы, может быть, вы тоже...
The region's forces, as well as placing troops on the ground. For instance, France's Operation Barkhane, 4,000 troops. So why is this so? Why is these attempts failing? One could argue that given the scale of the problem, the Sahel G5, which consists of a 5,000 strong joint force comprising Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, and Niger, is just too little. Geographically, the G5 countries, however, are essentially a desert the size of Europe. So the force was too overstretched. One could also speak of Mali's exit from the Sahel G5, as well as the anti-French sentiment across the region, which has undermined cooperation between Operation Barkhane troops and those of the Sahel G5 troops. Then there is the issue of the poor civil-military relations seen in a number of coups and attempted coups, which has undermined the legitimacy of states across the region. So, in my view, we need to dig deeper and look at issues of history and context if we want solutions. Now, the representative of the Russian Federation to the UN Security Council debates in the Sahel stressed that terrorism does not exist in a vacuum, that it is closely intertwined with inter-ethnic, intercommunal narco-trafficking and organized crime across West Africa. So, in other words, context matters. Terrorism in Africa is not merely a post-9/11 phenomenon. Despite the presence of Al-Qaeda and Islamic State's franchises, terrorism has deep historical roots in the region. So consider here the jihad in the Senegal River in 1673, the Fulani jihadist uprisings in 1725 and ending in Makina in 1818, the jihad of Uthman Dan Fodio of 1804, the jihad of Al-Hajj Umar Tal from 1856 to 1861. So we also need to factor in how issues of ethnicity intersect with militant religious identities. For instance, the 4,000 strong Liberation Front of Masina, which seeks to revive the 19th century Masina Empire. I mean, they are recruiting from 20 million Fulani spread across the Sahel. And other factors like economic marginalization, political repression of certain groups, and the impact of climate change all feed into the current upward trajectory of terrorism. Given this complexity, military solutions on their own will not end the current wave of violence. What is needed is the need to reduce conflict dynamics in societies, promote good governance, promote genuine nation building, and very importantly, inclusive economic development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hussein. We've got questions that we received through a special form on our Press Center website. If those who are with us online want to comment, give their comment on the question, just raise your hand and I'll give the floor to you. Konstantin Bobrov sent several questions. I'll read the first one on what are the consequences of Mali stepping out of G5 and how successful they were in fighting terrorism and how security will be ensured from now on in the region. Who is eager to comment on this? If, well, you're the first answer. Yes, please. Yes, Mr. Hussein.
Yeah, look, I think it's very significant because Mali is at the epicenter of what's happening in terms of the Sahel. I mean, you could go back to the 1990s in terms of the Tuareg rebellions and the interactions that they've had with various militant groups and so forth. And I think their stepping out is a major blow to the Sahel G5 countries. But I also think there are wider dynamics at play, as I mentioned, and I'm not sure how the French are going to maintain their forces there because those forces were supposed to operate in conjunction with these countries. But there's also been a problem where officers who've been trained in the West, ostensibly in terms of counterinsurgency and so on, come back and stage coups against their own governments, and that's a problem too. And so I can also understand, given the military junta in place in Bamako, why the cooperation is a bit problematic at the moment. Thank you.
Спасибо, Андрей.
Thank you very much, Andrei Vadimovich. I want to add only that an obvious thing that counterterrorism work requires multifaceted approach in Sahel, and that means that sooner or later the Sahel 5 should be reconvened, and that will be a matter of discussion and a matter of negotiation, not only within the 5 but also with external actors. The French factor should be kept in mind, and the fact of those others as well. But I think that's not the end of Sahel 5. It will be renewed, I hope, in near future. Thank you. The next question again, most probably to Andrei Kortunov from Konstantin Bobrov. Within the working visits of Valentina Matvienko, Speaker of the upper chamber of the Russian Duma, it was said that Russia will get to a new stage, new level of cooperation between Russia and African states. What will be aspects of this cooperation, of intergovernmental cooperation? I would prefer people from the government to speak about that and comment on that. Well, we are fond of speaking about new levels of intergovernmental cooperation. I think there are several things. The upper chamber leader meant the impetus that was given to cooperation between Russia and Africa after Russia-Africa summit convened in 2019 in Sochi. The summit was a success, and nearly all leaders of African states attended that summit. That was a very powerful signal saying that it's not that Russia returns to Africa, but goes there with new ideas and very specific projects. Another aspect that we should keep in mind is that Africa, like other continents, fell a victim to coronavirus over the past 2 years. Maybe it didn't attack Africa as much as Europe or America or Southern Asian countries, but this factor contributes a lot. It gives new opens of windows of opportunity, but also provides new risks that we are to deal with. And the last point that should be mentioned, but is not absolutely positive, is the crisis between Russia and the West in its relationship. Systematic systemic sanctions. So this raises importance of African states for Russia's window for cooperation, but also this requires new transport and logistic chains and calls for a new market search, and that's a new challenge for Russia. I hope we will be able to respond to it. And it's true that we can speak about a new stage from the point of challenges and opportunities opened. Thank you, Andrei Vladimirovich. And another question from Ivan Smirnov. You actually mentioned, Mr. Kurtunov, that the continent depends on grain supply from Russia and Ukraine. And our colleague continues on this topic. How sanctions will tell on Africa, how they manage the food crisis, and what support Russia will give to the friendly states. And the last point will be, the last part of the question will be addressed to you, Andrei, but I also invite our guest to elaborate on this question as well. Are you... well, yes, please. Your comments are welcome. One of the major consequences of the global level of the events that we are witnessing in Ukraine is aggravation of the food security situation. The acuteness of the situation steps beyond the group of products that are exported from Russia and Ukraine, because Russia and Ukraine exports mainly wheat and also vegetable oil, sunflower oil, and some other, but consequences are much broader, because some adjacent food products are also affected that form the basis of food basket in region. For instance, in North Africa, in Egypt to some extent, and Algeria, they depend on wheat supply. But southern Sudan, for instance, also depends much on grain imports. There are 36 countries in the world that have grain supply from Russia and Ukraine at the level of nearly 50% of the grain import. Russia and Belarus are the major suppliers of mineral fertilizers, nearly 20% of global export of fertilizers, and they are supplied to Africa. In Kenya, for instance, Kenya is one of the largest consumers of Russian and fertilizers from Russia and Belarus. Thus, the situation becomes very challenging, and it's on the agenda of many international organizations, in particular in UN. In grain export from Russia is not under sanctions, actually, but still we are challenged by the situation, because the question is how that we are to use European ports and insurance of Russian cargo vessels that transport grain, how to maintain transportation chains that are threatened now, and that calls for separate solutions. And as for Ukraine, the main problem for them is shipments of grain from Ukraine. Between 50 15 to 30 million tons of food products have been accumulated in Ukrainian ports. They are to be taken out of the ports from the Black Sea, for instance, through land borders. Part of the products are transported through the borders with Romania, but that's not the amounts are not enough. So the points of negotiation now between Russia and Ukraine is a comprehensive measures to have a seamless export of both Russian and Ukrainian grains and also Russian and Belarusian mineral fertilizers. I believe this issue can be resolved, and if we manage to achieve some agreement there, and virtually we speak about weeks that we have, because silos are to be freed from old stocks, and no procrastination is allowed in these issues. If the issue is resolved, this will create a better, more favorable background for negotiating other issues between Russia and Ukraine. That's why the issue is in focus now. And I want to be optimistic when we speak about this issue. Thank you, Mr. Kortunov. I see that we have Mr. Segal back with us, and the technical issue was resolved, and so the microphone is back to you, Mr. Segal.
Thank you very much. It was a big technical issue, actually. I live just very close to the Lebanon and Syria border in Israel, and we've just had a military operation over the last 20 minutes, so all the systems were closed down and communications blacked out. So watch the news on Syria events or Lebanon events later on today. Maybe they'll release that information. I'll just give you a bit of history about the Sahel because it brings in the global issues into this as well. That the 2017 French request for United Nations Security Council approval of deployment of a counter-terrorist task force. And it's very significant when we talk about counter-terrorist task force in Africa, it's actually an extension of the Middle East. That the groups operating currently in the Sahel are not liberation groups as we saw during European colonization, but we're seeing it as an extension of Islamic jihadi groups. So what's happening in terms of counterterrorism in Sahel is an extension and expansion of what is happening in the Middle East or globally. So the United Nations Security Council was requested to assist and pass a resolution and debate. And very significantly in 2017, there was global interest. For example, the German Bundeswehr agreed to contribute 900 troops. They were deployed in North Mali. The European Union funded 50 million euros, and both Russia and China expressed support for the operation. France and the United States reached an agreement in June 2017. So we actually see that there's global interest here in reaching a resolve in the Sahel. United Nations Security Council unanimously approved it, so all 5 permanent members were vetoing on that. And however, things don't always go according to plan. 10 days ago, on the 15th of May, Mali made a decision to withdraw from the G5 Sahel Group. And this is very unfortunate and regrettable because it is their own security. So irregardless of what they might think about French leadership or French intervention, on the ground, it is citizens of Mali and it is Mali state security which needs regional collaboration and international assistance. And having said that, we have to actually look at this to say that countries in the region, in Sahel, and both north to Libya and south to Nigeria, now need to redouble their efforts to protect human rights amid protracted political and security crisis, that there is a need to try and renegotiate another regional security arrangement. The challenging political and security dynamics in Sahel and the very much uncertain outcomes, because we don't know what's going to happen in transitions both in Mali and Burkina Faso, have always slowed down joint force operations. So what is happening within each nation impacts regional collaboration. So the more unstable each of these countries are, the less likely we're going to have regional collaboration. And for example, the G5 Sahel, it was on the writing was on the wall. Mali might have withdrawn now on the 15th of May, 10 days ago. But the last high-level political meeting in the G5 was November last year. So we're looking at almost 7 months where the leaders of these five countries, 7 months, 5 countries, haven't actually discussed much amongst each other in terms of defense and security. It's not meant over 6 months. But having said that, military forces sometimes tend to look at the practicalities of the ground. And yeah, we have to really thank the commander of the G5 Joint Force, Commander General Omar Bikimi, who actually carried out 3 sector operations since November, despite the fact that the presidents or leaders of the countries haven't actually met together. Mali's withdrawal from G5 is definitely a step backwards. However, the positive thing is that the United Nations is still heavily involved in this. The United Nations multidimensional integration stabilization force in Mali, MINUSMA, still has a mandate by the United Nations Security Council and is continuing to provide support both to the remaining G4, now we can actually call it, so long as it's mandated by the Council. So yeah, we see that there is a need for the international community to put pressure through the United Nations to continue to assist those other countries other than Mali, but also to assist Mali through MINUSMA. Today being Africa Liberation Day and looking at the state of the G5 Sahel, we can say that protecting the most vulnerable, the vulnerable people, has become ever more important. And indeed, as mentioned, the situation in Ukraine and the situation elsewhere in the world, as we might say, what is happening in the Middle East, has become even more important. In the Sahel, there have been many, many reports of serious violations committed against civilians by terrorist and armed groups. I say armed groups because the economy at the bordering points of these countries is black market economy. It is transition of cigarettes even, not even weapons, just plain cigarettes. And the livelihood of people is dependent upon contraband, and that is not sustainable development. To be sure, uprooting the global terrorist groups, such as Islamic terrorist groups, is deeply enmeshed and embedded within the unique challenges of the Sahel, and makes counterterrorism operations immensely difficult to carry out. The United States, for example, under Biden, and even more so under Trump, have tended to neglect the operations in Africa, throughout Africa. And we see this expressed and expanding into North Mozambique, for example. So the situation in the Sahel could easily deteriorate and move southwards throughout the equatorial Africa. Civilians fall victim to groups, and unless there's sustainable efforts, small efforts are pointless. It is perhaps a time today, in fact, to begin to rethink approaches and the way things work. It's not just a matter of throwing more and more military forces and more money to governments to try and attain a solution. We have to think of some innovative approaches. And as mentioned earlier on in the program today, teamwork is one of them. And it's teamwork at the ground level, and it's teamwork at the international level. And this constantly evolving tactics of terrorist groups as well, whose influence keeps on expanding. We can say, looking at the G5 Sahel in retrospect for the last 5 years, that the international community, donors, partners, have struggled to reach a consensus, have struggled to attain that teamwork, to look at the most effective support mechanisms for collective response in the Sahel. And the lack of consensus persists. Despite the recognition by all. Everybody recognizes there's a problem. And that probably, as always noted, is the first step to finding a solution, is to recognize there's a problem. But there's a lack of consensus on how to reach a solution to the problem. And so both the terrorist onslaught and the lack of development, the poverty, the famine, the drought consists. And it's a slow burning, mortal threat to international peace and security. And one thing is clearly obvious from the COVID pandemic is that unless you find solutions, for example, in Africa, and you have this influx of refugees crossing the Mediterranean, unless they are vaccinated in Africa, you'll find that it becomes a global issue, a global pandemic as well. So unless you find sustainable development, for example, in Africa, and medicine and education, it becomes global, it moves upwards. And we've known this always in the history of Europe. And unless you find a solution, for example, in Middle Europe, you would have the First and Second World Wars. And unless you find a solution through the European Union to the regional need for ethnicity and language and culture, you'll find it becomes a global issue. So what I did in the report was look at the G5 Sahel, and things have moved. And very topical this month because Mali withdrew, but we do need that international consensus. And security is very evident. We've been talking about the trade in grain and the high price of wheat and so forth. Egypt is the highest consumer of wheat worldwide. And if there's instability in Egypt as an expansion of that, then the Suez Canal is in danger. If there's a hijacking of ships on sea, as was in the case of the coast of Somalia for many, many years before international force came in, then you find that it affects entire security as well. So what happens in Africa has an impact on the trading routes through the Suez Canal, the oil tankers across the Cape Sea routes in South Africa, and indeed in terrorist operations worldwide. And we mustn't forget, Osama bin Laden started off in Khartoum in Sudan. We mustn't forget the first terrorist attacks of Al-Qaeda in Kenya and Tanzania set off as a prelude to 9/11. So counterterrorism, G5 security, and human security of individuals is all closely interconnected on Africa Liberation Day. But integral is focusing on Sahel, because unless you find a solution to Sahel, it could expand further north, for example, into Morocco. We had the Arab Spring in Tunisia. It could expand once again to there, and indeed into Egypt, which is entire southern Mediterranean basis. And thank you for having listened to me and giving me the opportunity to express my thoughts. Thank you.
Большое спасибо за...
Thank you very much for your contribution. Now I turn to our guests in our studio, and if there are any questions, well, it looks like our comments have been exhaustive. Anything that you want to comment on? You're welcome.
I don't know. So far, I was really interested in the conversation, and so as a kind of final remark, for me, it's very interesting to see how basically everybody agrees that the Sahel is a very connected region. It's not like an island, but and so it's an area where the global crisis there find extreme shapes, be it on food, climate, or conflict, and also that it's really permeable to regional, intra-regional dynamics, which means the risk of spillovers, and so which means also that a number of a variety of interests, of different interests, need to be factored in. I also totally agree when people talk about, our panelists talk about local solutions to local problems, and also the International Committee of the Red Cross truly believe that this means not only ownership by the communities, but also sustainable solution. But at the same time, the last point on the teamwork, we also feel as a humanitarian actor that alone we cannot make a difference, and then regional international collaboration and assistance are really much needed. So this is really where I really see that it's a very valuable discussion, the one we're having.
We also want to thank you, Mr. Redaliev, for your contribution and your being with us, and Andrei Kortunov. In conclusion, well, we are just on virtually a few days away from St. Petersburg Economic Forum. To my knowledge, there will be quite active participation of African states there, and all those who have Africa in the focus of their attention should keep track of things developing at St. Petersburg Economic Forum, and what maybe practical deals will be struck there, or some practical steps attempted there. And then we'll live and see how second Russian-African Forum be convened. That will be another prominent event that will open new windows of opportunity for cooperation with Sahel in particular. Thank you, Mr. Kortunov, and I would like to thank all our contributors to the discussion for their expert contribution, and we will be looking forward to meet you again at our platform. Thank you very much.
Yeah.